Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Spark of Genius Flesh and Blood production. Another episode of Spark to Your Genius. We haven't done one of these in a little while because there hasn't been that much to talk about. Because we've been in like a bit of an off season up until I keep saying Outriders, and I know it's Outsiders. I think Outriders is just a cooler name, honestly, but it's Outsiders. So we've been recording content, and I am joined by a very special guest here. Hasn't been on the channel in a little bit, but we decided to bring on someone who's just better than most people. Let's put it that way. So we have the on the bobble. I want to say co-caster. It seems like it's your channel as far as LSS and most people are concerned. So let's go with the
Oh, poor Jay.
the co-caster of On the Bobble, Yuki Lee Bender. Yuki, welcome back to the channel. How's it going?
Pretty good. It's good to be back. I've forgotten all the greetings I get when I come on to Spark of Genius. You really
There's a lot of honorifics, but I feel like I'm just gonna put them in the comments instead, in the description. Just gonna be like a paragraph at this point. But
oh
unfortunately,
my goodness.
Rob is further disposed, probably keeled over from editing our latest video, so he's on a bit of a hiatus for today. So this is
Poor
going to be
Rob.
me and Yuki, which is okay because we're focusing on draft, which is kind of the one thing we're both doing a lot of. I'm not doing nearly as much CC as you, obviously, but I'm doing as much drafting as I possibly can, and recording as much as I can for drafting. So we're going to talk a little bit about limited in the context of draft. So as of recording, we are 3 weeks out from PT, something along those lines. I think we're about 3 weeks out from PT.
Yeah.
So I think I think it's fair to say that everyone is kind of focused on both formats now. Everyone's trying to find out, how do I draft my seat and what angle am I taking to take on the CC portion. So ignoring the CC portion here, as far as the mixed is concerned, I think there's two. Just for anyone who doesn't know kind of the structure of the PTs, there's two draft pods essentially, one on day one and one on day two, I believe. And I think it's going to be the first thing you do. I think it's just a pod and then 4 games and a pod and then 4 games of CC, something along those lines, unless that's changed. But
I think it's changed. I think it's CC draft CC, something like that. I forgot. I
I don't
know
know if
that it's
that's
changed.
I don't know if that's better or worse, but that's okay. So they're going to be doing at least 6 games of draft. That's the point
Yep.
we're making here. So I want to start off a little bit more, a little bit slower. That What do you think about Outsiders draft? I know you had first impressions and you've already kind of seen it, but now that you've actually got like a lot, I feel like you've gotten a lot more drafting under your belt since kind of the first little bit here. Has anything changed with your kind of analysis on drafts? Not as far as like complexity, but also as far as just like overall feel compared to. I mean, the most previous set, Uprising, is definitely a far cry, double the amount of heroes
Mhm.
you can draft, right? But what are your thoughts about that?
So far, I'm really liking it. I feel like I'm still figuring things out. I haven't drafted the most. I think I'm about 6 drafts deep at this point. So definitely lots more to explore. But already just seeing that there's multiple ways to build these heroes, different people have different ideas about how to build Benji or Katsu or Riptide. And I'm not exactly sure like what is the best way for all of them, but it's feeling kind of like there might be multiple good ways, and on top of there being 6 heroes, it just feels like there's a lot more room to build the heroes the way that you want to, compared to a set like Uprising where it just kind of felt like you had like better Fi or worse Fi. You didn't have like a
Yeah,
specific type of Fi.
that's fair.
um, so that's a huge difference, and I think in general the power level is also a little bit lower. One of the big takeaways that I have from this set so far is anytime you can be on rate. So if you're getting like 3 per card and 1 for your action point, which is kind of like the base rate that a lot of people are talking about these days, when you do that, it feels really powerful in this format. So just looking for ways to be on rate as much as possible is probably going to lead you to success, is my initial impression, I guess.
Yeah, no, I definitely would echo that, especially with the lower power level. I mean, just you still have like very aggressive decks. I mean, Ninja's in the format, right? I mean, that is the one of the quintessential aggressive decks. So that is still there, but I think that kind of to your point with the 3 power, I think if you're able to cheat that, you're doing pretty well. But otherwise, it's just like an average of, can you blurt out? If you can blurt out like double digit damage, I feel like you're doing pretty good on like some kind of reoccurring basis. Whereas like I think 5, that's just your average. kind of thing. Whereas like if you're not doing double digits, you probably lost, or there's some kind of issue with your deck, right? Uh, so that's fair. I kind of understand that. Going into the kind of PT, this is maybe for people who maybe aren't as used to practicing draft as like a non-casual format, because Road to Nationals, one of the formats is draft this time. It was last
Mhm.
year, is going to be this year. And also for sealed battle hearts, so limited battle hardens are usually sealed into draft. So there are going to be like more opportunities not at the PT to be playing draft at a non-casual level. Do you have any like tips on players trying to kind of improve their drafting for these more, tier 2 plus kind of events?
Yeah, I think there's a few things you can do. One of them is when you are starting out in the format, I think it's okay to even kind of like force decks a little bit more than you might normally, just to get a feel for what they look like and just try out cards. Like just say, okay, if I don't know, if I'm trying to figure out Benji, do I want to have as many 2 costs as possible? And is that a good deck? Or do I want a mix of other cards in there? And just kind of like go in and try posing a question and kind of testing it and seeing, does this work or doesn't this work? And either takeaway is pretty useful, but I think you really kind of want to find the boundaries of the draft format and like what works well and what doesn't. And so I think that's the number one thing. And the number two thing is more and more people are putting out draft content where you can actually watch their draft and they talk about it as they draft. I know
Yeah.
like Man Sant has been streaming a bunch of events and a bunch of people playing with them have been streaming. And if you check that out, that's always useful, even if they're not drafting optimally, which I don't think anybody is at this point in the format. You might learn something, right? You might see, oh, okay, in this spot, had they done drafted this card instead of that one, maybe they should have speculated on the ninja card and they could have gotten into ninja, and because they didn't, it really changed their draft. Or, they're valuing red peace of mind really highly and I'm not. Maybe that's something I need to look at. And maybe you come to the conclusion that they're wrong, but just having more kind of food for thought and different perspectives is good. You're never going to cover it all on your own. You're never going to figure
Yeah.
out everything on your own. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. It's also just much harder to like CC Blitz, you can just Talishar, whereas draft is
Yeah.
just you have to get X number of people, I get minimum 6, but usually you gotta get 8 people together. You gotta use now they have like draft fab, like there is like online clients and other resources, but it's just a lot harder, right? And it's also more expensive
Mhm.
to practice drafting if you want to use like packs. So definitely using like I think POV footage is kind of what you're alluding to, like point of view of someone drafting, ideally reviewing the picks afterwards. If not, you can just watch raw footage. That's also okay. It really just depends on kind of your style. But that is definitely true, and I am also seeing more and more of that. But I think the next thing that people are probably more so interested in are the specific hero choices and like cards and specifics. We're not going to go into like crazy amount of depth here. That's really not that's not that would be a very long video if we were to do that. And also a lot of people probably would agree, disagree, might not find it immensely useful unless it was broken up into like a specific part series. So we're just going to go into like more of the hero by hero, but like just below the surface level. So we're gonna say more than like Benji's a ninja. Try to go first. It's gonna be like the cards that really set that hero apart. I think probably I want to start with ninja first, just because that is like one of the returning classes that was quite different in that founding set. Like in Welcome to Wraith, Katsu had a very different identity, I feel. Whereas you can do a lot of different kind of generic strategies, especially was something that I very much enjoyed. Like my 3 Katsu 27
Mhm.
generic decks, quite fun. But also like D-Reacts were just like everywhere, like movable sync bolos. Like you could play Turtle Katsu, whereas just this is not a thing in Outsiders, right? So I feel like the identity of ninjas kind of changed a bit. So I kind of want to start with ninja, specifically Katsu. I know the big ones that I mean you've probably seen, Bonds of Ancestry. It is a rare, of course, but it like thank God it's a rare, right?
Yeah.
It is a rare, extremely powerful, just breaking your math essentially in a good way. Like you want to break the math, right? And Mask of the Many Faces. There we go. There's a lot of
Mhm.
masks in this set. I think those two from when I was trying Ninja were kind of the peak cards that enabled like that more aggressive style because I feel like with Katsu specifically, I find that I'm really trying not to use Katsu that much just because I'm a
Mhm.
little bit too worried about um not necessarily fatiguing, but just like lowering the deck density to the point where I might need that 3 block or that blue card for some other purpose. Um or it's just that like you can use it to really get another 3, 4, 5 value out of a card, and that's fine. But if you can't, you're just shoving a card below rate, right? So where there are situations where I found that if you have that extra blue 0 cost, that's kind of okay because you don't want to arsenal that card, or you're just like you need to get more damage across, and maybe it's going in for lethal kind of situations. I feel like those are more niche scenarios, especially like later in the game. Whereas early in the game, I feel like Katsuing doesn't feel as great as before. I
Mhm.
don't know if you have any different thoughts about the any kind of power picks or how you've been seeing Katsu roll around in your drafts.
Yeah, I haven't gotten a chance to draft Katsu. I have draft Ninja, but I've wound up in Benji both times, and we'll talk about why. But I agree with you that Bonds and Mask of Many Faces, I think, are like the premium reasons to be in honestly either Ninja. If you have both those cards in Benji, like it it's pretty easy. When you have Mask of Many Faces, it just lets you skip everything
Yeah,
and play Bonds. And then as long as you have, I don't know, like a 3 for 0 with combo that you can tutor and you have a few copies of that card, like you're kind of set.
yeah,
And just doing that once in the game is like that can be your deck's game plan is I'm just going to play on rate, get to a point where I can have enough life to take damage and play this Bond's turn, and then they're either going to be dead or they're going to be so low that they're just Kodachi locked for the rest of the game. And I think that I think you can play Ninja without those cards, but it feels like there's a huge power bump if you have Bonds and Mask compared to if you don't. And sometimes Mask is even good without Bonds. Just turning on your combo is really good. Like if you can make
yeah,
your Gust Wave into a 5 for 0 instead of a 3 for 1, like that matters. That matters a lot.
yeah. No, it does. That's true. Um,
Um,
I think.
Yeah, I
Sorry,
think
go
you can
ahead.
also just I think you can also just play the starters. Like I think the head jobs aren't great, but any of the like leg tap starters, so spinning wheel kick and twin twister is
Yeah,
great. Surging is obviously great, but I think any of the ones that are hitting for these breakpoints are really kind of where you want to be with Katsu.
yeah, just that 4 plus because I think
Yeah.
what Katsu lacks in like relevant on hits that slow your opponent down, you just gain combo buffs. So you just like your shit hits for more damage than the other people's in
Yeah.
general. And if you're in a pinch and you have mask, you kind of get like if you really don't want to Katsu, you mask, and then you kind of have to Katsu if you want to get like that secondary, like a ban or something for a red gust wave is still like that blue that hits for 1 is not as good as that red that hits for 5, and they cost the same thing kind of thing. So that definitely makes sense. We can go a little bit into Benji is the one that you kind of alluded to that you definitely have more experience in. I have about the same. I've played Benji once or twice in like online ones, and I feel like um I mean, the elephant's the room. The elephant in the room is a 17 health, right? So 17 health versus 20 in Blitz. I'm not gonna do percentages because I'm tired at the moment, but 3 out of 20 is a big percentage as far as I'm concerned. So I feel like there's like two things with Benji that I'm concerned with. It's mainly how many combo openers that are red's good, but yellow's also very very good because I wanted like a
Yeah.
good mix of unblockable damage. I feel like every time I was like let's just make a deck that's like super unblockable. It's like that's all good and well, but the cards like brush off exist, armor exists. The thing with like this set is it's like Benji's kryptonite has always been armor. Even ever since he came out, it's always been armor. But this limited
Mhm.
set, like LSS ain't dumb. They know for a fact Benji's gonna roll around and kill everybody if they don't have access to easy armor. But the thing is, like every class can have seekers, multiple seekers especially. They can have armor and seekers. Like they have a couple like get out of jail free cards. So I feel like Benji still needs quite a bit of power, like as far as the reds go, the go agains to really like balance it out. But what do you think has been like some of those key kind of breakpoint cards or key combo enabler cards or stuff like that that maybe matter more for Benji specifically?
Yeah, so I'm not sure how much yellow you want. I think you want some. I think some yellow starters are very good. In particular, Twin Twisters is really good if you can get the follow up with back heel kick. Because if you come in for two, give your next thing +1, and you also get the Benji buff +1. It comes in for 7 because it gets that much +1. So that's like a really good thing to look for. I also think that the head jab line is quite good with either finisher. I think it's recoil and 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
I kind of like those finishers in red, honestly, because then they come in for a breakpoint of 4. But I think, of course, like you want the blues in your deck anyways, and if you come in for 2 unblockable and put a card on top or deal 2, that's also pretty good. So I
Yeah.
think you can go either way. But I think that you don't want to go overboard, and you do want to just like if you have a chance to take your red twin twisters, you're looking for a scrap reds, like you're
Mhm.
just like really efficient cards, you want to be doing that. Yeah, so the biggest thing with Benji, I think, is just trying to find ways to make those efficient kind of like 3 card hands where you're going like Kodachi, Kodachi, Be Like Water, Red Descendant Gust Wave for 6. And that's like a 3 card 10. And I think you're just trying to do that. At least that's been my approach, is I'm just trying to do that as much as possible. And then you have ideally like a big pop off turn with bonds and gust waves.
Yeah.
Um, I think Benji is pretty good at enabling Gust Wave because you can usually get yellow Be Like Waters pretty easily if there's no other
Yeah.
Benjis, and then just like Kodachi Kodachi Be Like Water into any Gust Wave is just pretty good. Like even the blue one's a head jab if you can combo it, which is fine.
Yeah. No, that's
Um,
fair.
yeah, so that's kind of Benji in a nutshell. I think you need to, because you have 17 life, you need to be forcing your opponent to block,
Mhm.
and sort of like threatening, like, you have to block because if you go to 8, I'm just going to chip you out really easily. So they kind of can't take a whole bunch of damage. And I guess it's like the best offense is a good, or the best defense is a good offense, right? I think that's
The
very much
best
what Benji is
defense is
doing.
a good offense. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's definitely true. I mean, going first also kind of helps, honestly, but
Yeah.
um, beggars can't be choosers. It's like the five mirror. It's just like whoever rolls second usually wins. But I feel like maybe Benji is just not as explosive, but because you start with the life loss, like because you're starting with less life in general, it's like a different reason to go first because you're just like you've taken a hit to the face already. Like you've taken a 3 to the face. This kind of feels like, but um, usually you're able to claw that back in turn 1. Like on turn 0, you're usually able to, if you have enough unblockables, force something through, depending on their armor. But if you get armor out of them, that's also pretty good. Um,
Yeah, I agree that going first is pretty nice. Although going second has felt better than I thought. I think just again, like
I think if you have a lot of
making them
reds,
block. If you can make them block, if you
yeah,
can like go Kodachi Kodachi 2 unblockable, you've chipped them for 4, and then you present like a 6 or something that they just kind of need a block. Like that's pretty solid. And I think
yeah,
that's kind of what you're trying to do.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. So that's a little bit about ninja. Let's go into assassin. We're gonna save ranger to last. I feel like ranger deserves not to be last. We're saving the best for last, right? Of course. So we're going with assassin. It's funny, the assassins are just like their card pools are just so interchangeable, whereas just like I feel like there's only a couple cards that you really like only want as Arachne or only want as Azuri. So like Prowl, for instance, real good in Arachne, really mid in Azuri, right? But
Yeah.
then there are cards like, oh, all your generic 2 for 5s, your 2 for 6s, pretty decent in Azuri for your 2 card hands, fine in a probably not really what you want to be drafting, or especially early, as Arachne. But I guess we could start with Arachne just because he is the one hero that is coming back with a new solitary confinement. So I guess he's busting out of I'm not really. I don't understand the solitary. Like, is he coming out of solitary confinement? Like, I don't understand.
I from my art, it looks like he's like I think he has people in solitary confinement, and it's not a very pleasant time for those people. That's
I
sort of what
get
I got from the art. It looks pretty spooky.
it does look pretty spooky. They got that mat that's coming out too. The mat definitely looks very spooky.
Yeah.
So 19 health. So they felt like there was some innate advantage with Arachne that he needed to be popped down to 19, along with Riptide. But we'll talk about that later. Um, it's interesting when they like do these kind of weird health values for heroes that are just like, was this just like an error and they kind of went with it, or is this just some really strong ability that they're kind of going with. And Arachne's is like, go again on your first stealth card, which again, for cards like Prowl, very good. But I feel like Arachne does, it can vomit his hand better than Uzuri, for lack of a more pretty term. It is
Yeah.
generally what he likes to do, right? Especially if he can do 2 on hit stealth cards in a turn, which is kind of nice, like a pitch for a dagger, stealth with go again. If your draft is like super good, you're like rabbling or seek horizoning, something like that, and then you're hitting them with like another stealth card with like a reaction, and that's a really good 5 card hand. Um, but I feel like you're also fighting over a lot of the same stuff as Azuri. So like your spike reacts, your Razor's Edge, they're very very premium reacts in both, right? So I always kind of I've drafted probably Assassin the most out of all of them, and I've always just been like, what am I? Am I drafting Azuri? Am I drafting Arachne? I never really know until like I think one of the POV drafts that are coming is like I was solidly in Arachne and I get past Shakedown Pack 3 and I'm like, I guess I'm solidly in Azuri now. And it's just like you never really know. But like I don't know what your feelings are for Arachne
Y-
specifically.
Yeah, I think you're right. There is a lot of overlap. I think you identified the red stealth cards being good, especially with on hits and Prowl being a premium.
Yeah.
So I think like the more red stealth cards you have, the more you want to be Arachne. And I think also the other piece that you mentioned was the attack reactions. I think are really, really important. If you're just doing daggers and red stealth cards, you're not going to be able to beat Izuri. And I don't even know if you can beat a good Riptide deck either. Um, you're just
Probably
not
not.
presenting any breakpoints. It's like kind of hard to close the game. So I think you do need a way to close the game. And I think the biggest thing is those attack reactions on things like, is it Infect, the Blood Rot
Yeah.
stealth card?
Yeah. In
Yeah.
fact.
Yeah. So I think you're really looking to do that. And it's just so hard to block, right? Because you have
Yeah.
this mix up of you're coming in for 3 go again. They can't really block 6 because you're threatening another stealth attack with some
Yeah.
on hit potentially. And if they don't block it, you're just like, well, I got this attack reaction. So I think that's what Arachne is trying to do. And I think that those two things are kind of what make me decide I'm Arachne is that I feel like I can close the game through the red stealth cards and the attack reactions.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think it's just also a matter of like if they happen to have like if they're ninja and they don't get the ranger assassin traps like the red 0 for 3s on your ninja, then maybe on like some brush offs or some peace of minds, which like, oh, it's all well and good, but they're not probably on 10 attack reactions, so there's a very good chance you'll draw that beforehand and you'll be dead in your hand. Pretty much you'll be dead on arrival, and then when you
Yeah.
need to block, you're going to have a brush off in your hand and you're going to be sad because it comes in for 4 and you can only block up to 3. Oh man.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree that I think the red, it's like red stealth and attack reactions, but it's also kind of like with the dual class cards, kind of interesting. And I guess I'll use this as a segue into Azuri, that the dual class cards just seem much better in Azuri. And that's not only because like the dual class cards can't be played from hand and Azuri just has text that says you don't have to. So it's other than that particular fact. Um, I feel like Arachne, I don't end up arsenaling in Arachne nearly as much as I do in Azuri. And I think that's just like a function of like much easier go again, possibly like better reaction threat density with stealth cards. But I feel like also the generic count also goes down in Arachne compared to Azuri, just because like you can't sneak an on hit with a generic because you don't have pumps. You don't have your pumps for generic card. Well, I guess short and sharp. I guess if it's a 2 power. Yeah, but it's like a 2 power or less, right? It's not really I think it's 2 power or less. So it's not super ideal. But Azuri is definitely the class I probably drafted the most of at this point. I think she's allowed to like do some random stuff. And I don't really know if anything ever pushes you into Azuri other than like Shakedown, obviously, but other than like some early death touches, like I've gone some really early like red yellow death touch, and I got 2
Mhm.
of these, some sneak attacks. Those are like the only 2 rares that I think I've seen in packs, and being like, if I could get like 2 or 3 of these, I think I'm pretty solidly in Azuri, unless something else crazy appears. But
Yeah.
I'm not really sure if you've seen anything different. Even the equipment is just kind of like all the equipment just does the same thing. Like Azuri doesn't really like benefit that much from other like wrought armor and just like seekers and
Mhm.
stuff like that. but there's not like a ton that's other than like literally sneak attack, death touch. I'm like, yes, I really want to play Azuri, but I don't know how you kind of approached it.
Yeah, I think I agree that Azuri kind of depends on the cards that you have to swap in. I think Sneak Attack and Death Touch are amongst the best ones. And you also kind of, there's a few other ones that are okay, like some
Virulent touch,
yes, that one.
virulent touch, yeah,
That one's good
uh,
at closing out games.
yeah,
I think Humble in red is quite strong.
yep.
And what's the other one? Destructive Deliberation, the on hit
Two
ponder
two
one,
for
I think is
five, yeah,
also good. Yeah. But I think you really do want to have those red um, big attacks, and that lets you kind of just get a lot of value out of her hero ability. And I think Azuri kind of plays more of an attrition style. So whereas Arachne is more aggressive and kind of plays out his hand and pushes damage with his attack reactions, Azuri's kind of grinding out value by saying, well, if you don't block and respect my attack reaction, I'm going to hit you with some on hit like a humble or destructive deliberation and get extra value. And if you do block it out, I just get to arsenal this card and present it to you on a later turn. And it's kind of like my stealth card attacked for like 5 or 6 or however much they blocked. So I think Azuri, I think you're right that she plays a lot better with the generic attacks because those are a lot of the big attacks.
yeah,
And I think you can kind of draft Azuri and Arachne at the same time and just pick good assassin cards. And then depending on which of those you see, the swap targets or the lots of red go again and attack reactions, you can kind of decide. Like maybe even as late as pack 3, I think you can decide. I'll say that I feel like Azuri has one of the highest floors in the format. Like it's very easy to have a serviceable Azuri deck, but I have yet to see an Azuri draft deck where I'm like, yes, like
this is 3-0.
that's a 3-0 deck. That's like
No,
they got the nuts. Like it's always like, yeah, it's solid. You can win
yeah,
with it, but it's
yeah,
not like wow. Whereas I feel like when the ninja decks come together, when the ranger decks come together, even
yeah,
like the really good Arachne deck, like I think that those decks all have a higher ceiling than
yeah.
Azuri when you get all the pieces.
Yeah,
So
it's definitely just Outsiders 5, but just like way less damage. It's like, can you 2-1 with this deck? Yeah, probably. But like, can
yeah.
you 3-0? You know, once you see the other 2-0, if they're the only one in the pod or they're one of the two and they just got all the nuts, then you might struggle a little bit. But I definitely think that she's a good the floor is really nice, especially when you're starting out, so you can gain some more confidence in like your picks and like how well different cards perform with each other. Speaking of 3-0s, let's go on to Riptide. See what I did there? So we're gonna do Riptide first, and the reason is because I think this hero is going to be the one that people are going to pick because they have a pile, but people are also going to pick um, because they don't know what to do. So they just like have a bunch of ranger cards and the buffs didn't come. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I guess I'm Riptide. Like I don't know how many people are like actively okay, you could pack one, pick one collapsing trap or something like that, sure. Right? But I can't think of like very many cards that are pushing me into Riptide unless I just have the biggest serviceable deck that I can possibly construct. And I think that's very interesting as far as like hero design kind of point where you're just like, okay, so I just have more 3 blocks than you, but I don't have a weapon. So I'm just going to try to get a bunch of value off playing things like traps to reload and then have like 2 to 3 card hands, but I'm not dominating. So I'm just like taking your cards with like big infecting shots and stuff like that, which I find very interesting. But
Hmm.
I admittedly have not drafted Riptide yet. Not that I did it. No, I didn't want to. It's fair, but I didn't find enough pods. First of all, 2 ranger pods. I think if you're in a 3 ranger pod and you're Riptide, you're doomed. That's just my
Yeah.
opinion. Like you're not having fun with Azalea either. But I think specifically Riptide, you're doomed because they're all sharing the arrows regardless, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I've only been in like 3 ranger pods so far, which has been a little bit awkward. But so assuming that you're just like in a 2 ranger pod, and assuming you're the only Riptide, is your deck better than the only Azalea deck? I don't know how many scenarios that's ever true. I don't know if you've seen any pods where you're just like, yeah, this Riptide deck was definitely better than this only Azalea deck. But I'm not sure how you feel about Riptide specifically.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that specific comparison. I think it's just going to depend on how the draft shakes out. I do think that Riptide is very, very strong, but I think you're right about needing, I think not only the card density, like you need to have a large amount of playable cards because you don't have a way to, like, you need to fatigue them. Basically, you need to have enough damage in your deck that they can't block it all and you can kill them.
Yeah.
So I think that means you need a lot of reds, and I think that means you need like probably minimum 35 cards, and honestly, probably like even north of that is
Probably like
preferable.
high 30s, low 40s would be like ideal.
Yeah. And I think he gets a lot of equity out of like because of the free reload with traps or free reload with like the pumps or the rabbles, any of the go agains. He gets very efficient turns. He can either just function off a red, like rabble, pitch a red, come in with an infecting shot, or alternatively, if he has a yellow in his hand, he can get extra value and get that aim counter on his arrows. And I think he's really good at getting those aim counters on using the Barb Castaway's flip ability.
Mhm.
So I think that he's really just trying to be always on rate. All my cards are worth 3, and I have more cards than you. So I think when it comes together, it's really good. I did actually lose to a Riptide deck at an armory who ended up 3-0ing, and I thought my Benji deck was pretty good, but I just got destroyed. Um,
You got
so I think that
Riptide.
the ceiling on that is pretty high,
Yeah.
but I think that it doesn't come together all the time, and you need to be able to beat fatigue. You aren't it's not just going to happen.
Yeah.
You need to
You need
have
a
enough
plan.
cards, or I think maybe pumping give and take is the other way. Give and take's a majestic, but
Pumping
it
give and take.
says
Yes.
I had it in a draft in Chicago. I went 1-2. I think I was very tired. My first round I played pretty well, and the second round's not so much. But I think like if you get give and take early and you can go like scout scout give and take for 9, if you hit this or if you block this, I put like 3 cards on top of my deck. Like that's a big deal. It counts for a lot, and I think that it's a pretty real reason to like I think it goes a long way to beating that fatigue plan as Riptide.
That's fair. I admittedly, the Scout give and take strat did not come to my head sooner, and I regret that immensely. But that's okay. We're all about finding new strategies here for draft, and we're gonna end off our little hero tour with obviously your favorite hero. It's definitely the first one you've ever played, Azalea, and I Azalea was an arc. Obviously, she had Death Dealer. Very different hero with Barb Castaway.
Yeah.
Especially when I played her relatively recently. I just looked at my bow and I'm like, why doesn't this draw me a card? I wish this drew me a card. And it's just a very different mentality because you have to like kind of work with what you got. You get no freebies and you have to like really because you're not Riptide, so you don't get that reload. So you have to pay and then yeah, you can flip with Azalea and you can do different stuff for dominate, but it's more resource intensive to actually like figure out what's on top and not just blind Azalea and just pray. Um, but I actually had like a decent amount of fun playing Azalea. I think there are definitely some cards that the buffs matter a lot more than Riptide as far
Yep.
as like Scout the Periphery is probably Red Scouts are premium on top of the laces. Like the not as far as the non-ranger buffs, I
Mhm.
think Come to Fight and Scout. Probably Scout. I don't know if Scout's over Come to Fight all the time, but I probably want both. But I probably
Yeah.
slightly lean towards Scout. Um, and then all the laces are great. Obviously, Blood Rot and Frailty being really, really good, and then Inertia's still pretty good. Fletch the something something, the one where there's like
Yeah.
different colors, the red,
Red,
yellow,
red,
blue. Yeah,
yellow,
yeah, yeah.
blue.
So
Yeah.
yeah, 144 is pretty good apparently. So that's like one of those things. And
Yeah.
then I think like a bunch of like yellow and blue spire snipings. Like the red one was kind of mad, but I think you need a couple of the yellows and blues because you need to opt, right? You need to opt at home.
Yeah.
So I think those are like kind of the ones that after playing more Azalea, I've realized that like these are going to be quite crucial. And then just the big arrows that you're fighting with everyone else, like infecting shot, withering shot. Um, I don't know how much you've played Azalea and Outsiders, or if your opinion of her has changed, seeing kind of the different ratios and different strategies people are bringing with their draft decks or not.
Yeah, I think that in a lot of ways the deck looks similar, that you want to have a bunch of arrows and pumps, but I agree that not having Death Dealer is a pretty big loss in efficiency. And I think that it can be a little bit tough being Azalea sometimes. You really need the right mix of cards, and I think on top of that, the deck is very intricate to play. It's challenging. It almost always goes to second cycle, and I think it's really tough. I think it might be my pick for toughest deck to play in the format. I think it is quite hard. I think the cards that you identified are all same thing here. The pumps are really important, and access to the top of your deck through Rabble, Seek Horizon, Scout, which you mentioned is really good. I think having like 2 or 3 Spire Snipings goes a long way. And I like the Ranger hat that when you block with it, you can look at the top card of your deck.
Wayfinder's Crest.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, very very good card
Yeah. And the Seekers ones are also pretty decent
because
in
they opt.
Azalea. Yeah, especially if you have either multiple, so you can like pitch a blue and essentially like opt 3 times,
Yeah,
or
peace of
maybe
mind.
even if you have a peace of mind.
I feel like like
I don't
you're
know.
like how big is your blue count really to be like, oh, I have a blue for
Yeah,
this, and then I have reds. Like there's so many
I
hands and just like
agree.
so many all red hands, and you're just trying to get an arrow
Yeah.
out. But
That's why I said maybe. I'm not so sold on that
yeah,
one. But I do think that having ways to gain knowledge of the top of your deck is really important. And the armor ones are nice because if your opponent is going wide, like it's a ninja, for example, you can get some information before you commit all your blocks about, yeah, that card's pretty good, or maybe I should block because the top of my deck isn't good.
yeah. No,
So
that's fair. So we've gone through all the heroes here. The last thing that at least I had in mind were people have been trying to do like pack one pick ones, and the videos are just kind of like these short like here's a pack one pick one. LSS does like the dev one, which is different because they're LSS. But as far as like the other content creators, I think I've seen like a couple, and they're just literally here's a pack, and that's it. So I really haven't seen that much commentary on what people think good pack one pick ones are, or at least in like the highest percentile, right? Like the ones where you might have good cards in your deck, but then there's this card, but also whereas like okay, your pack is trash. It's like this is the best card, right? So I'm more talking about like good cards regardless. So whether there's like I've opened some packs where like half the pack is premium, but it's just like
mhm.
there's got to be a pick, right? Are there any of kind of those cards for you where you're just like you're coming back to again and again, and you're just like okay, this is it can't be a pack one pick one. It's not a signal, right? Obviously, it's like your
Yeah.
opening pack. But as far as the card that you could possibly try to either build around or something that can like put you into that direction or anything that along those lines.
Yeah, so I think for me, one of my big takeaways from this set so far is that a lot of the generics aren't really generic. Like we kind of talked about the big attacks being good in Azuri. I think a lot of the cards go in 1 or 2 heroes better than the rest.
Yeah.
Like Scout goes in Ranger, and you don't really want it anywhere else. So I think a lot of the cards are like this, and even some of the hybrids are good in not all the heroes. So I think that staying open by picking generics is a little bit scary for me. It's not something I like doing unless it's like one of the ones that truly is good in a lot of decks and very powerful. So like looking for a scrap red comes to mind as like very flexible and very strong. Maybe not so much in Ranger, but fantastic in Ninja or Assassin, which is pretty good. If there isn't a card like that, I'm looking to just pick powerful cards. So I think a lot of the cards that we kind of highlighted going through the heroes that we're saying that's really nice to have, those are the cards I want to start with. So that's your Bonds of Ancestry and Mask of Many Faces and Ninja. Perfectly happy to first pick that. Sneak Attack for Assassin, or like the Spikes is really good. Maybe a red Razor's Edge, I'd be pretty happy. Or like a red Infect, like those cards that you're really hoping to get. Death Touch, very good. And then in Ranger, I'm pretty happy first picking the Laces, I think. Any of the Laces are pretty good. Uh, I should also mention Come to Fight. Come to Fight is a card that is pretty flexible, and I think red Come to Fight is serviceable in basically every deck, especially
Yeah.
because it blocks 3 all the time. So that's maybe like one of the few flexible picks, but I don't think there's that many. And I think what I notice is that the people who draft generic a lot wind up in assassin a lot, and I don't think that's a mistake. I think that your ninjas and your rangers don't want to be playing many generics, and you can draft generics and that's fine. Like destructive deliberation is a fine pick, but just be realistic that you're pretty much taking a class card even though it says generic.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, that's fair. I also noticed that, especially compared to the more so Welcome to Wraith, but like one of these heroes comes from Welcome to Wraith, another one comes from Arcane. So when you're comparing like generics in those two sets, generic is truly generic. I feel like in Welcome to Wraith, you can build whatever you want, more or less, right?
yeah.
And Arcane Rising, same. I think the power level is a little bit different for the generics there, but relatively speaking, Cadaverous Contraband could be played in anything. But it's also a little bit of a I think because the correlation for the packs is a little wonky sometimes. I think that when you get your 3 rare packs versus your 1 rare pack, it begins to be a little bit of a mind game, right? So
Mhm.
I feel like compared to any other set, my pack one pick ones have kind of changed because of that reason. And I now like have more rares in my reasonable pack one pick one that I can actually see on average. Just because you're going to be getting more of them, but like they still went back to the 14 card draftable kind of that they introduced in Uprising. But I think I agree with pretty much all the picks you put. I also feel like um some of the I feel like the rare traps are a little bit overlooked in limited, but
Mhm.
I'm because a lot of them just don't do that much compared to like a sideboard piece in CC. But as far as a lot of the dual class traps like the blood rot and the frailty, specifically the frailty and the blood rot, I think inertia is fine, but I think the frailty and blood rot, I think have some potential if the pack is really awkward to still
Yeah.
be kind of flexible. Now the issue is that not great in Azalea. But
Mhm.
Riptide loves them. But then the assassins, I think both assassins are also pretty okay. So I also find like those dual classes you mentioned, um, if I can hit at least 3 heroes, which is
Mhm.
like literally half with that card, I think it's fairly good as a pack one pick one. As like a general rule, I literally cannot think of a single card that comes to mind as like an auto pack one pick one that you haven't mentioned. But I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure if I sit here and think long enough, I think like the red rare cards are the red rare cards. I think they're generally going to be on the
Yeah.
higher end, but I think it's also a matter of comfort. So some what other people consider pack one pick one, you might not because you just don't want to play that hero like Azalea cards. A lot of people just don't feel comfortable playing Azalea, which I totally understand. Um,
Yeah.
so I definitely agree with that. Is there any kind of summarizing thoughts you have on maybe either how you think like how essentially how do you think people will develop their drafting up to PT, and what do you think people are gonna, because obviously people draft differently at like a world's draft compared to a Nats compared to a casual. What are you kind of expecting people to develop into?
I think that because most of the classes lean, or sorry, most of the cards lean towards a certain class or hero, I think you're going to see people kind of draft with preferences where, like you said, there's going to be multiple close picks, and it ultimately comes down to like maybe the context of that pack and what you like drafting. And you can kind of lean towards like maybe two of the three classes. And I think a lot of people are maybe going to have like, I'm confident with ninja assassin and I'm going to try not to draft ranger. um, I think you want to have at least two classes under your belt though, because this format, I guess formats like this where the cards are so specific, you get really rewarded for finding the open seat or the deck that is underdrafted. I think if you can do that reliably in this format, you're really in a good place. And one of the things I would say is that just because I pick one, pack one, red bonds, and then I get a surging strike, that doesn't mean that I'm ninja. It means I have really good incentive to be ninja, and if I keep seeing ninja cards, I'm going to keep taking them. But if there's a pack where I go, these ninja cards are kind of mediocre, not sure if someone took it or not, but like it just doesn't feel great. and there's a solid card for another class, I'm just going to pick that up and just keep my options open and go, I'm probably not going to miss this ninja card. I have such a good start already. If I miss like a yellow head jab, like whatever, I'm going to pick this, I don't know, red infect or whatever, so that I have a good option to go into assassin if that's what I should be doing and kind of feel it out over the next couple of packs. I think because of the pack collation that you mentioned, where it's like a little more all over the place, you can't really look at one pack and just be like, oh, this is definitely a signal because I got this card late. Like there could be three really strong cards for that class in that pack, and another class could just be not present.
Right.
So you're really kind of looking at like two, three, four packs in a row to really kind of get a feel for what's happening. And honestly, sometimes even the wheel, I think the wheel gives a lot of information about what's at the table, and you're probably not open to every deck by the time you get to the wheel. I think you kind of need to be choosing, but you can maybe be like between two classes. I think that's quite possible when you get to the wheel. If you have some, like a generic, you have a threadbare tunic, and you have a hybrid class card of the two, and then you have like two of each card. Yeah, you
Hmm.
could pretty reasonably be either class.
Yeah, no, that's
So
totally fair. Okay. Well, appreciate your time to talk about this new draft format, which we will have to stick with all the way until, my God, October? Is that correct?
something
September?
like that. Yeah.
Oh man, that's Nats too. Oh, okay, that's fine. It just like remembering the fact that we had to play Uprising for so long just gives me like some nightmares because that format needed to end way sooner than it eventually did. But it's still a very fun format. If anyone watching or listening hasn't tried it, definitely highly recommend. Pretty fun, diverse. They did a good job, kind of making everything fairly balanced to the point where it's fun playing all six of the heroes. And with that, go check out Yuki's co-casted YouTube channel on the Bobble, where they literally do podcasts of exactly what we just talked about, but in different kind of contexts. And she's joined by Jay on that one, another one of our locals. So with that, appreciate everyone for watching. If you like this kind of content, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to both of our channels if you are not already. And with that, from wherever you're watching in the world, have a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Bye for now.
Hi, everyone.